an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Young Wizards, Book 5, The Wizard's Dilemma. Chapters 1 and 2, Friday afternoon and Friday, early evening. In these chapters, Nita is feeling a little prickly lately. And it's not entirely clear to either her or Kit exactly what the problem is. I'm not sure I know either. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Yama for commissioning this episode. Yama has been just all over my schedule. She's been commissioning so many episodes these past couple of weeks. Thank you very much, Yama. This book has started off very differently than the others. In all the other books, there's been a pretty immediate conflict. It feels like too strong a word. There's been a very immediate objective. How about that? We know here's the thing we need to accomplish. It's a pretty big job. What are we going to have to do it? Or, something along that line, that there's, okay, clearly this book is going to deal with Darine getting her power and maybe overestimating herself, things like that. But this is the first book that has started off with just mostly a lot of character stuff. That's not to say that there isn't other stuff happening. The magic is still here. It's still, a huge part of the story. But we're spending a lot more time with Kit and Nita just thinking about their relationship with one another, where magic is like only an incidental part of the actual conversation. And it's really interesting to me because as much as I really do like these books, and I do, Kit and Nita are not entirely familiar characters for me. It's sort of an odd feeling to have spent so many books with them and to feel as if I don't totally know who they are. Like, Nita, I know that she is gutsy, that she stands up for herself and for other people. I don't feel like I know that much more. And Kit, even less. So when we have like a POV chapter from Kit's perspective, that came as a big surprise. I never thought we were going to get that at all. Excuse me. That's what I get for chugging water before I start. I really thought that these chapters, or that these books, were going to be more from Nita's perspective, and Kit was going to be her very close friend who was around a bit, or a lot. But I didn't expect him to be a POV character. And, as things stand right now, he may not be a huge POV character. This might be something that the book jumps into here and there, that the series jumps into here and there, when it feels like it's really necessary for us to get Kit's perspective on a thing. But it's not necessarily going to be that he starts getting as much screen time, so to speak, as Nita. But the thing about Kit that I find really interesting is his parents and how little I know about his relationship with them. It feels much more distant than Nita's relationship with her parents. And, Kit is Hispanic and Nita's name is Juanita. So there's this inference that one can make that she is also Hispanic, but there doesn't seem to be a Hispanic culture in her home. With Kit, he talks about his mother making arroz con pollo, and there's an accent to his voice in the audiobook. it's very much emphasized with him in a way that it isn't with Nita. And because of that, I kind of wanted to see more of him. I wanted to know more about him because I felt like it was nice for there to be a Hispanic character that is as front and center as Kit tends to be, with Nita being like also kind of coded as maybe Hispanic. Like, there being two Hispanic main characters, basically. That's an unusual thing. And I am hoping that we do get more of Kit's POV. Because I'm just, I would like to get to know both of them more. And the conflict starting off between the two of them, it's riddled with possibilities. Conflict is good. You need it. All right. So we start off the chapter Friday afternoon with Nita's mom asking her, "Have you seen Doreen?" And her offhand response, "She's on Jupiter, Mom." I'm sorry, Nita's mom. I just really it's one of those things that I'm glad that they told their parents the truth. I'm glad that they don't have to lie. I'm glad that they can be open about their abilities and what's going on. But also, it's not entirely fair that these parents, raising a kid is just hard fucking enough, says the girl who has never raised a kid and never will, because it sounds way too hard. To raise a kid who can go to Jupiter and get more stupider. No, I'm just kidding. Who can go to Jupiter and can run out of air if they let their spell go a little bit wrong and, die. And then, let's say that happens. They're stuck on Jupiter and they're dead. What do you tell the cops? How do you explain my child just disappeared? They're going to think you killed. It's going to be a JonBenet Ramsey case where there's just going to be all the suspicion, but no evidence. It's going to be terrible. What I'm saying is every single book, I feel more for the parents involved in this. And I respect more how good of a sport they all try to be. I mean, last book, I was annoyed at the fact that they were trying to separate Nita from Kit. And I stand by my annoyance. But it is understandable how afraid they were for their daughter. I mean, granted, it does seem that the powers that be sort of moved them to be more afraid so as to send her to the center of the action. But nevertheless, I don't know how I would cope with this were I in their shoes. I feel like it would not be pretty. So they are talking again, really offhand, really casually about Doreen trying to create life, going to other planets, going to the moons on other planets, what kind of problems there could be with single-celled organisms that were on Europa, while Nita's mom just makes a grocery list, which I find so great. She's just trying to do some routine house shit. She's just trying to maintain the domestic front. And here comes this talk about how her little sister's on Europa solving some kind of conflict. And I just think that this is so well done. Just life goes on. Yeah, my kids are wizards. Also, we need to eat dinner. What are you going to do, So yeah, I really liked this. Let's see. For the past month or so, her mom had been alternating between stripping and refinishing all the furniture in the house and leading several different projects for the local PTA, the biggest of them being the effort to get a new playground built near the local primary school. It seemed to Nita that her mother was always either elbow deep in steel, wool, and stain, or out of the house on errands, so often that she didn't have a lot of spare time for anything else. It's interesting that she is worried about this when her mother is so worried about her being way too deep in her magic. I wonder what it is that, like, because parents being busy isn't really usually something that captures a kid's attention. And I wonder if this is supposed to be an indicator that her mother is attempting to cope with the stress of her children and what they do by distracting herself. But I feel like there's a hint here that I'm not quite picking up, but maybe I'm not supposed to yet. So then we go to a little bit of detail on what's going on with Nita in terms of school. I found this really interesting. We get a little bit of her difference in age between her and Kit, which I feel like it's been mentioned before and I always forget. I assume Kit's older, but I don't know why. Nita started 9th grade this year and to her surprise was finding the work harder than she'd expected. She was used to coasting through her subjects without too much strain, so this was an annoyance. Worse yet, Kit wasn't having any trouble at all, which Nita also found annoying for reasons she couldn't explain. And the two of them didn't see as much of each other at school as they'd used to. Kit, now in an accelerated study track with other kids doing better than their grade, was spending a lot of his time coaching some of the other kids in his group in history and social studies. That was fine with her, but Nita disliked the way some of her classmates who knew she was best friends with Kit would go out of their way to remind her whenever they got a chance how well Kit was doing. As if they're fooling anyone, she thought. They're nosing around to see if he and I are doing something else, and they can't understand why we're not. So, all right, first of all, Kit wasn't having any trouble at all, which Nita found annoying for reasons she couldn't explain. Honey, you don't need to explain that. When you have a close friend who is doing well without effort at something that you find almost impossible, that's tough. You don't need to have a reason. Not doing well when somebody that you've previously felt you were equal to is doing way better and is doing so much better that they have been placed in a whole separate program from you, that's going to knock your confidence a little bit, like naturally. So yeah, I get it. And then the fact that he's like over here teaching other kids and he's not spending as much time with her, I could see that being like they have been inseparable and magic has been at the forefront of both their lives. But now he's spending time tutoring kids in something that is not magic related, that he's just like, you know, investing energy in his regular life as much as he had been in magic. That is going to be, it's going to be, feel like her as a priority is lower on his list than she had been. It's going to feel like she's maybe being edged out a little bit. So, you know, as maybe irrational or unfair as that is, it really makes sense why she's feeling this way. And I don't blame her. It's, you know, she's a kid and she's had one friend who knows a massive secret and knows how to also do the thing. You want them to be and remain as close to you forever as they have ever been. And if things begin to come between you and you feel like you're growing apart, you're naturally going to begin to resent that. So really, Nita, it's fine. You are entitled to feel these ways. The pressure to be like everyone else, to do the same stuff and think the same things just grew. And if you took a stance, the gossip might be driven underground, but never very far. She kept running into problems for which wizardry either wasn't an answer or else was the wrong one. And even when it was the right answer, it never seemed to be a simple one anymore. As in the case of this project, for example. So then we get into what this issue is here. We don't really find out exactly what the project is until later. But here we get the emotional history behind it. And this is really telling because the previous book, Nita finds out that you can have like a partner in wizardry and then outgrow them and move on from them. And when her aunt tells her that this happened, Nita has a bit of a panic reaction because she just can't imagine her and Kit growing apart. They have hardly ever disagreed about the way to do anything. And her aunt saying that sometimes that'll happen. You will both like want to approach a problem from the same way. Nita is just floored that that could ever happen because it seems like her and Kit are so symbiotic that they're almost of the same mind. So coming into conflict just seems ludicrous. But now we're getting to see how this actually manifests. And it's really interesting how angry Nita is about it when honestly Kit is being very reasonable in talking with her about it, as frankly as he is, as honestly as he has to, as we know, because the speech requires honesty from both of them. She takes it so hard, and it's one thing to be like, I can't believe that you don't trust my judgment on this, which is what she says later to Darine. But it's another thing for when somebody is like, I'm sorry, but I really don't think that this is going to work, to then be like, fine, just do it yourself, and to stomp away. She doesn't talk it over with Kit. She's just angry and then escapes as if she almost like she's afraid of what he's going to say if she actually tries to have the talk with him about how she is feeling and how it's obviously coming from a place of inadequacy on her part. She is feeling really weird because Kit is ahead of her in school. He's doing better than her at certain subjects and has newer, so-called smarter friends. And I think that she's starting to feel like I think she's feeling like he doesn't see her as an equal anymore. I think that's really where this is all coming from, is that everybody else seems to see her as a step down from Kit in terms of like the social hierarchy and success. And she thinks that Kit is also beginning to see her that way and beginning to treat her differently because of that. And so her reaction to him thinking that the spell she's created isn't going to work the way they want is much more acute because she's already got some fear and baggage about the way he sees her. And poor Kit has absolutely no idea. We go into his POV later, and he genuinely, there is no inkling that he realizes how bad she feels about herself. He doesn't seem to know anything about it at all. That is a bummer. That means that Nita has not communicated that at all. And it could potentially mean that Kit isn't paying very much attention. I don't want to put that entirely on Kit. We haven't seen any of the conversations between the two of them about schoolwork and how all of that is going. So I don't know if there is some subtext that Kit should have picked up on in the way that Nita has said something in response that, you know, it seems like he's being a little too dense by not getting. But honestly, it comes down to, this is Nita's problem. Your friends being successful cannot make you resentful, because that leads to you wanting less for them to make yourself feel better. And that's really selfish. As somebody who has been on the receiving end of that kind of attitude, it really makes you retreat and stop trying as much because you are afraid that your friends are not going to like you anymore. And that is a really ugly place to be mentally, that you're worried being too good at something is going to outshine them and make them angry. And I just really, I want Nita to cope with this without having to ever say to Kit, I'm mad that you're doing better than me, because I don't feel like that's something that you really ever unhear. I feel like they could try and talk it out and, you know, move past that. But I feel like that will naturally leave a sort of like gulf between them where Kit won't want to share things with her the way that he had, because he's afraid that this is going to be one of the things that sets her off a little bit. And that's not healthy. If you have a friendship, you should be able to celebrate successes with one another. So the thing is, I want Nita to be more mature than probably I have any right to expect, because she's a kid and they're going through this stuff for the first time. So I don't know. I feel bad because Nita is obviously not unintelligent. She says herself that she's finding it harder than she expected because she had always been able to coast through her classes before. So that's not to say that all of a sudden she's completely flummoxed and has no idea what she's doing. She has her homework done already in this chapter. She's doing stuff at the kitchen table, and she's working on wizardry because she did her homework at school. So she's able to complete stuff. It's just that she has to actually put forth an effort when she's never really had to do that before. And if you are used to not having to do that, it can make you feel a little bit nervous, you know? As somebody who was a big fish in a small pond and then moved to the big pond of college and realized how many amazingly talented people there were other than me, and that sure, I was pretty good at what I did, but I was going to really have to work to prove that every day. It's a little bit frightening. You know, I admit that it was a shock that I wasn't ready for, and I got a little resentful over it. So I could see that happening in this case as well. But we're going to get to that conversation about the specific spell a little bit later. There's a moment when her mother is talking about getting this rye bread with seeds in it, and Nita asks her to get the one with no seeds. And her mother's like, can't you just use your wizardry to get the seeds out? Why do I have to do this? And I love this. She's like, probably I could, but the trouble is that the bread was made with seeds and it thinks they belong there. The wizardry would just be a real pain to write. Probably simpler to just take the seeds out with my fingers. Her mother raised her eyebrows, let out a breath, and made a note. Small loaf of non-seeded rye for daughter whose delicate aesthetic sensibilities are offended by picking a few seeds out of a slice of bread. Mom, picking them out doesn't help. The taste is still there. I loved that line especially because I don't know about y'all, but that was the kind of picky eater I was when I was a kid. It was like, you couldn't buy a pepperoni pizza and then take the slices of pepperoni off of it and give me the slice and say it was cheese pizza. I can taste the pepperoni grease. I'm not an idiot. I know what you just did and I don't like it. And this is not cheese pizza and I will not accept it. So yeah, I appreciate this. Oh, right. Her mother is looking, at Nita's notes and is like, maybe I need reading glasses because the math you seem to be doing over here is way higher level than I thought. And Nita has to be like, no, Mom, this is the speech. This isn't math. And later on, her father comes over and looks at the list, and it looks like it says Lint. And her mom starts to be like, huh, that's really weird. Maybe I do need to go and see an eye doctor, because I just seem to be not great with my sight lately. So that's interesting. And I am a little bit concerned about this. I feel like this has been mentioned a couple times now in this very first chapter, and that this is going to mean something. And I don't really want this to be a thing. So then we get a pretty cute back and forth between her parents. And later on, it turns out that her mother left the note, the list at home, and has to call and get it from her husband. And we get a little explanation from Nita about writing spells and how if they turn out to work, they will be uploaded into this book for other people to use, which is a pretty neat idea. It's like crowdsourcing spells. And then she heads out and she stops to say hi to a rowan tree that we find out later gave her a wand. I really like that it's described when she stops to talk to the tree, that it specifically mentioned how her sense of time slows down really weirdly because she has to kind of get in the headspace of a tree. I think that's pretty cool. I really like details like that in these books where everything has its own awareness, but it also has its own perspective within that awareness that you have to accommodate when you try to talk to them. It really is a kind of empathy that is above and beyond anything that we really deal with usually as human beings. And I think it's super duper important to what it means in these books to be a wizard and be a guardian of life. You know, the fact that you can feel what it is to be what they are when you speak to them and engage with them, I would have to assume means that you engage with them differently than you would have if you didn't know, you know. Even later, Kit is thinking about how talking to aliens and all of the weird extraterrestrials that they have come across, even the ones that are kind of incomprehensible, he still has this affection for. And you would, if you're able to get into that headspace, you are going to be able to at least a little bit relate or have room for a point of view that it's just, I don't know. I find it really fascinating, and I find it to be an extra piece of detail that doesn't need to be there strictly, but adds so much dimension to everything they do. I don't know. I really, really like it. So she uses her spell to go and meet Kit, and they are meeting on this, what do you call it? Is it a dock? Is it a quay? I'm trying to remember. She's standing near the end of a long jetty, right, of big rough black stones, all spotted and splotched with seagull, guano, and festooned with washed up seaweed in dull green ribbons and flat brown bladdery blobs. I loved that because the Northeast has a very particular kind of seaweed, and I knew precisely what two she was talking about when she said this. The bladdery blobs one was always one that as a kid I was kind of fascinated by, but also grossed out by, because they really are. They're little, it's almost like the size of the, what do you call it? In bubble wrap, the little bubbles in bubble wrap, but at the end of each strand of seaweed, it's really weird. So you can pop them, but you have to squeeze really hard because the skin is thick. It's just really strange. So she goes down and she sees Kit at first, and he's sort of laying down in this weird way, facing away from her. And her initial reaction is oh my God, is he okay? But as she gets closer, he just looks over at her and wants to know. She's like, what are you doing? Why are you on the ground? And Kit says, I'm just keeping a low profile. I don't feel like spending the effort to be invisible right now with work coming up. And there have been some boats going through the inlet. Might be something happening at the Marine Theater later. It's been a little busy. So she pulls open her manual. And earlier she was saying that hopefully this time she can get Kit to see what she means by something. So she shows him the thing and asks him to assess it. And she starts to talk over it. And he's like, hey, give me a second. This is really complicated. And then the sort of camera pulls back, so to speak. And we find out that the point of this spell is to clean up the water around here. New York and the bedroom communities around it, all up and down Long Island and the Jersey Shore, which, by the way, I've never heard residential communities talked about as bedroom communities, and I found that really weird. Pumped terrible amounts of sewage into the coastal waters, and though the sewage was supposed to be treated, the treatment wasn't everything it was cracked up to be. There was also a fair amount of illegal dumping of garbage and sewage going on. Various wizards, independently and in groups, had worked on the problem over many years, but the nature of the problem kept changing as the population of the New York metropolitan area increased and the kinds of pollution shifted. Nita and Kit were more than usually concerned about the problem, as they had friends who had to live in this water. Since shortly before Nita had to go away for the summer, they'd been slowly trying to construct a wizardry to take the pollution out of the local waters on an ongoing basis. If it worked, maybe the scheme could be extended up and down the coast. But the problem was getting it to work in the first place. Their efforts so far hadn't been incredibly successful. So I really love this. Obviously these kids are always trying to save the world. They're always trying to sacrifice on a big level. And that's all well and good, and it's necessary, and thank you for your service. But I like whenever there's a chance to see them doing something that's more everyday, and then find out that their everyday stuff is just as important and selfless as the huge sacrifices that they are asked to make when situations get really dire. And this is something that I've said before, in other fantasy that I cover, when people have powers, I always find it really frustrating that a lot of people who have like abilities, superpowers, magic, they tend to see things on a really personal level, and sort of thinking of it in terms of like a Spider-Man, where they wait for a specific conflict to come up and then they go and deal with that conflict. And then they sort of like lay low and try and just enjoy their life until there's another emergency situation in which they need to intervene. And then they go and deal with that. And then they go back to just waiting and watching and seeing it. There was an episode, mild spoilers for The Magicians season 4. There was an episode of The Magicians in which a woman who is, a hardworking blue-collar woman finds out that she has some magical abilities. And she lives in a city that is supposed to be sort of an analog for Flint, Michigan, and decides to focus her power on fixing the pipes so that the lead is no longer leaching into the water. And it was one of those moments of just like, oh, finally, somebody is using their power to effect a great good without there being a, quote, villain that they need. Like, one could say that the villains in Flint are the people who allow this to happen, and that's all well and good. But wrapping them up in a spider web and hanging them off a building to be collected by the police isn't going to be the thing. We need to actually fix the problem. And the problem is people are being poisoned. Children are being poisoned. And it was really amazing to watch a character have this selfless response, because so much of the time when you see selfless responses from characters who have powers, it's them wanting to sacrifice themselves for a friend, or, just one individual person they have some kind of connection with or who they know in some way. But just thinking about things on a global scale, or even just like, a statewide scale, it doesn't come up very often. And I would love if somebody had some fucking superpowers these days. Let's have somebody fix the bee problem. How about that? We could have somebody repair some of the ozone layer. We could have more of this water cleaning. We could have, healing the effects of fracking in different communities. There could be so much done. And environmental issues are a very boring topic for a lot of writers. And it doesn't have the same sort of appeal that going up against a supervillain has. So because it's way less flashy and sexy, it's not written into stories often, and it's too bad, because that is some fantasy that I could really get behind. That is fantasy on a different level, So he points at a section near the end of the spell and says, this is pretty slick. And then he goes back and touches like 4 or 5 sections. And I should mention, as he's touching it in this book, it's reacting like highlighting things on an iPad, where it's like graying things out and highlighting other things. He touches 4 or 5 sections and grays them out and is like, these though, I don't think we need any of these. And she starts arguing with him and says, if you leave those out, then there's nothing that's going to deal with the sewer outfall. That's tons of toxic sludge every month. And he gets really frustrated and says, Neats, this is all just too involved, or involved in the wrong way. You're making it more complicated than it needs to be. And she says, if you don't name all the chemicals, if you don't describe them accurately, and he says, the thing is, you don't have to name them all. If you just take a look at the spell I brought with, and this is the thing, he is in the middle of saying, why don't you look at my work? And she doesn't even entertain that. That's the key for me in this scene, because it's the kind of scene where, without a lot more background on what's going on, it isn't totally clear if anybody is being really unreasonable. Kit seems to be the reasonable one, but it wasn't until I went back and I realized that he had suggested that she look at his spell and she won't, that I kind of came to my conclusion that, like, oh yeah, you don't want to look at his work because you want to be the one to solve this because you're feeling inadequate, and you're letting that affect your attitude here. And that, can't excuse that. You got the opportunity to do some really helpful wizardry, and you let your ego get in the way of it. And what kills me is that Kit and Sri do the spell later, and it works really well. Evidently, it may not, continue on this way. But as it seems now, it appears that Kit was right. Sri seems to think his solution was much more elegant. And overall, it seems to be going in his favor. And I don't know if Nita even is aware of what his spell is. Like, she won't look at it here, but it's clear when she says, oh, here we go again. I thought he was going to get it this time. I really did. That sounds like they've had this conversation before. So if they have had this conversation before, and she says, Kit, look, that stripped down version you're suggesting isn't going to do the job. So it's like she knows generally what it is, but it seems like she has no faith in that. And then she yells, when she's talking to Doreen later, she's like, he doesn't seem to have faith in me anymore. And I'm like, no offense, Nita, but you aren't really prepared to entertain his spell either. I don't really know what you, how you see your attitude as being any different than his attitude. You got so upset that you walked away and let him do it alone, which, I mean, even though you guys got in a fight, he didn't just go home. He stayed and he did the job that he signed up to do. And I feel like that's going to kind of be a problem if you decide that you have these assignments that you've been given by the powers that you get annoyed and walk out on. I feel like that's not a great precedent to set. And I don't feel like the powers are going to be super receptive to that kind of shirking of duty due to personal conflict, you know? So yeah. And when he says she says, getting this wizardry running has taken too long already. And he says, tell me about it, in this way that's like very pointed. And she gets her dander up, as they say. So he says, what if we let Sri take a look at both versions? Again, it's a pretty diplomatic suggestion. Well, we have another person that's going to be doing this with us. Why don't we have them look at it? And she says, since when do we need a third opinion? And the thing is here, maybe you haven't in the past. You also haven't disagreed like this. So obviously you need to approach this differently than before. And you already have a third person that you are planning on involving in this spell. So what's the harm in just having them look at it? But again, she will not compromise here. And she says, it'll either do what it's supposed to or it won't. Let's test it and find out. And he says, I can tell already it's not going to do what we need. And she gets so mad here. And I'm going to give props to the audio narrator for this book. When she does Nita's voice in this scene, she does such an amazing job of conveying that kind of anger that makes your voice tremble, where it almost sounds like you're on the edge of crying or on the edge of like screaming at somebody, and it could go either way. And she really nails this performance of it. And I felt it, you know, like her rage and her hurt, you know, as well. And this is something that I struggle with because I am a planner and I do tend to see things a few steps ahead. And I have met in my life few people like me in that regard. And I have had to say the same thing Kit says here, where somebody's suggesting a thing and being like, why don't we just try it? And I'm like, I can tell you exactly how that's going to go and it won't work. And it's a hard thing to say because you do sound like you are absolutely out of hand discounting somebody, because you are. But if you know what you're doing, you want them to take your word for the fact that this is going to be a waste of energy. And that's part of Kit's argument here too. They are getting older and the amount of power they have is dwindling, and they need to be more conservative with it, and they need to be a lot more careful what they expend energy on, because that leaves less for other things. So that's another part of this problem, is that he thinks her spell is going to be a huge energy drain and they won't be able to sustain it. So yeah, she says something about how, you know, why don't you just do it yourself since my advice isn't worth jack? And he says, it's not that it's not worth anything. And she interrupts and says, oh, now you apologize. And I really appreciated that he says, I wasn't apologizing. And then she says, well, maybe you need to. And I'm like, again, no, he doesn't need to. You are reacting really wildly, girl. And he asks her, what do you want from me? Do you want me to lie? Which can literally be fatal? Like, do you want me to tell you that I believe this will work when I do not believe that? Neither of us can throw away power on something that might not work. And she says, do you think I wasn't considering the power drain? And then tells him, I didn't even put it through the spell checker, which is hilarious that it's called that, but I guess it makes sense. And she says, I checked all the syntax, all the balances by hand. It took me forever, but maybe the forever was a hint, Neats, Kit said. And that is the thing that sets her off. And she's just like, all right, fine. You know what? Bye-bye. And she leaves. And he's like sitting there staring at her because he cannot believe her reaction here. And I kind of agree with him there. If it took her this long just to create it, maybe that should be a hint. Maybe that should be something she's kind of paying more attention to. So she leaves and Kit sits there completely like, I do not know what the fuck happened just now. He even thinks that lately she's been a little bit off and he doesn't know what's going on because he says that it can't be school. Nobody bothers her anymore. She does okay. So he's only thinking of it in terms of her getting bullied the way that she had been. But he doesn't seem to realize how he's doing well and she's not. It doesn't sound like he's getting the suggestive comments that she's been getting either. It doesn't feel like he knows about the rumors or the innuendo. And I wonder if she has ever repeated any of that to him. I mean, he said when he came to visit her in the last book that people thought he had gotten her in trouble. So he has to be aware that those rumors are out there. But I don't know, maybe now that she's back, she's really getting the brunt of it rather than him. And he thinks to himself, our girl's another species, and then is embarrassed to have thought that. And this is when he thinks about liking aliens and the ones that he had met, he had like affection for. And it says Nita, who theoretically was just as human as Kit was, had been pushing the weirdness and incomprehensibility envelope pretty hard lately. Her behavior was hard to understand from someone who was usually so rational. And this is when Sri shows up. The scene with Sri, she cottons on to the fact that there is an issue between the two of them pretty quickly. But she doesn't really say anything about it. It's sort of like she's waiting for him to say something if he wants. And if he's not gonna, she's not either. And based on the way she talks about Kit's spell versus Nita's spell, I get the sense that Sri kind of knows what the fight was about and is keeping her thoughts to herself because she thinks Kit was right and she doesn't want to shit talk his partner in front of him. Even the couple little things she says make him feel a bit weird, and he kind of tries to like soften what she says because he feels a little bit guilty. And he even wants, like, later on he's thinking, should I tell Nita that the spell seemed to work? And then he's like, that seems unfair. I'm not going to do that. Now, I understand that feeling unfair in the moment. You guys just had this argument about it. It would feel like a real, like, fuck you. But again, it's a bummer to feel like I succeeded in this really amazing thing and I can't share it because you are too wrapped up in it in your head. That sucks. You know, Nita really is going to need to work on getting over whatever this is. So him and Sri, they do this whole thing, and what it is, and this is really wild, and I don't know where this author comes up with these concepts, but it's pretty neat. What it is they talk to the ocean. And the deal with the ocean is that basically the ocean is not... The ocean is very physical and is not really interested in the things that live in it. It says the merely physical ocean remembering that most ancient blood saline water had for a long time resisted the idea of anything living in it. Many times life had tried to get started as the seas cooled, and many times it had failed before the one fateful lightning strike finally lanced down and stirred the reluctant waters to life. Now Kit was suggesting with Sri a possible compromise. Here, in this one place at least, the ocean had an opportunity to return to that old purity, to water in which any chemical except salt was foreign. Maybe in other places the same intervention could be brought about with wizards to power it and the ocean's permission, but first they had to get this initial permission granted. It was a long argument, one in which the ocean was reluctant to let anyone else win even though it stood to benefit, which is really an inch because, like, the instinct I think a lot of us would have when writing about the ocean and trying to fix and heal it from pollution would be to depict the ocean as being a fierce but sort of often maternal force, because water is often associated with femaleness, and to have it be interested and willing to work with whomever it is that's trying to cleanse it. But to have it instead be fighting that, even though it's for its own good, gives it a really human dimension, weirdly, that I would never have thought to put in there. And I kind of like it, just this being like, well, I know you're and I know it, but, I don't know. Fuck you guys, though. Guys, I don't know. Like, it's just funny. So eventually it seems to hear them. And finally they back away, and Sri takes a drink and she's like, wow, it already tastes better. I think it's working. So he's on a bit of a high as he heads home. And I just really like the descriptions of like the things that'll change. And they do have to, like, the water will separate out the chemical and pollutants, but they are going to have to like come in and clean it up. It's just going to be like kind of dropped to the bottom, it sounds like, or I'm not even sure how this works. But in any case, it's not like it's completely maintenance free. It's just, going to be a easier job to manage. Also, Nita's name is still kind of attached to the spell, and Kit has to take it off and ball it up and put it into his pocket in a weird scene, because just erasing it is a super dangerous, not good idea. And I wonder if that is going to come back to bite him at some point. So Kit goes home. He's stops at one point at Nita's. Like, he uses the spell to head home and accidentally grabs the one for Nita's house because he's so used to using that one so much. And he thinks about going to talk to her, but he's soaking wet. He thinks that she's not going to want to see him, and so he just heads home. We get some amazing talk from Paunch, his dog, who is voiced, again, this woman who does the audiobooks is very good, and she does the most hilarious voice for him, and it is really well done. And we get to meet his parents on a little bit more of a conversation than we ever have. I liked it, and I like I like that his parents, we don't really get to know them as people too well, but we get the sense of how much more distant their relationship is than Nita and her parents. And I really, let's see, he says something to because his mom asks if Nita is happy with how the spell went, and Kit's real evasive about it. And he can tell that his parents both know something is up, but he doesn't really want to talk about it with them. And let's see, he takes Paunch out for a walk, considers again going to talk to her, but he's just like, I don't know what I should even say. He decides that he's going to basically send her a text, a wizard text. And he's like, I feel like she wants me to apologize, but I didn't do anything to apologize for. I don't even know what I would say. So he just says, if you need some time by yourself, feel free. And he doesn't get an answer. And thinking of this from the perspective of Nita, I feel like she is going to see that as Kit being like, maybe you need to get yourself sorted out before I care to see you again. I don't think that's going to go over real well, is what I'm saying. So yeah, I don't know. Oh, I'm realizing I think I went too far, guys. I think I was supposed to stop at early evening, and I'm off in, I'm realizing now I'm into Friday evening. I went too far. Well, what can you do? So I'm going to end it with, first of all, he follows Ponch, who goes outside, through this like weird portal. And we don't know where that goes. And he winds up somewhere that's like kind of almost seems like a vacuum, but clearly isn't, because he's been in that before. And Nita talks to Doreen about what's going on. And Doreen says, first of all, she asks her if she has her period, which was amazing. But then she says, do you think that Kit is confused about the guy that you were seeing in Ireland? And Nita's like, no, of course he's not. And then Doreen says, are you sure you're not confused about that? And Nita's like, and that's kind of how that conversation ends. And I'm like, it has really felt to me this whole time like this was about her inadequacy and feeling like there's something between. And I don't mean between her and Kit, like there's something between us. I mean, there is something that is separating them now because of their different experiences in school that wasn't there before. But this, I'm like, is it about Ronan? Is it about a relationship? I didn't get that feeling, but maybe that is. I don't know. And as for Kit, I don't know, like, what to think. I'm like, I'm wondering if I'm listening to the audiobooks and I'm realizing that I went into this chapter and I stopped at around the 50-page mark by accident. The part where Kit is here gasping for breath, he could move his hand a little, the dark shape blotted out the light. This was the spot that I stopped. And I don't know what happened here. Like, I don't know why. So I'm apologizing to anybody who has read only up until the last chapter that I said, Friday early evening. Because Kit going home and her talking to Doreen, that's all in Friday evening. But I didn't read all of Friday evening either. I apologize, everybody. I don't know what happened here. It's weird, though. It's like I automatically stopped right around the 50-page mark by accident. And I think that the breakdown for this book had me stopping at like the 35-page mark for the first episode. So honestly, it's like I'm more on track with my own calculations, but not with what I have been telling people. Anyway, I'm sorry, guys. And I think that maybe the chapters are not outlined in the Audible book because they aren't named Friday afternoon, Friday early evening. I'm thinking I stopped at the end of a section in the audiobook thinking that was the end of the chapter. And I was wrong about where the chapter ended versus where the audiobook ended. I don't know why these books, compared to other Kindle and audiobooks, are so fucking all over the place with the way they label chapters and titles and page numbers and whatnot. It is bonkers and it just doesn't make any sense. But yeah, Kit being in this like, in this, what do you call it? Sort of vacuum. I started to listen to this and then looked at the thing and was like, oh, I went too far and stopped. So I only got up to realizing that he can breathe. And then that was where I stopped because I was like, okay, I'm too far over. But that's in the Friday evening chapter. I'm sorry, guys. I don't know what happened. But I'll have to put that in the show notes for this episode. Yikes. And I'm also going, like, that means that for the audiobook, I can't just, like, listen to till the end of such and such chapter. I have to check what the last sentence is of the chapter that I want to read to and make sure once I get to that sentence that I stop, which is kind of not great because that means that I might spoil myself. I don't know. I'm going to have to look into this more, guys. But anyway, I have to wrap this episode up. Thank you very much to Yama for commissioning this episode. I really, really appreciate it. I'm sorry, guys, that I got mixed up, but I'm going to put my finger on my nose and say, not it. It's the audiobook, not me. And I hope that you guys have been enjoying the coverage. I'm very interested in this book. And I'll be seeing you again soon with a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.